Preface. Man ceased to be an ape and overcame the ape the day the first book was published. The ape had never forgotten this humiliation. Just try to give him a book and he will immediately spoil it, soil it, and tear it to pieces. From Zamyatin's unpublished preface to a book. In 1927, while serving as literary editor of Volia Rossi, an émigré monthly published in Prague, I got hold of the Russian manuscript of We by Zamyatin. The English version of this remarkable novel, the forerunners of works like Brave New World and 1984, had come out at Dutton's in New York in 1924. Since it had never appeared in Russian, I jumped at the opportunity of offering We to our readers, but I was afraid that this might create trouble for the author, who lived in Leningrad and obviously was not a favorite with the communist authorities. The novel was about to be translated into Czech, and I pretended that we were retranslating it from the Czech version. To give weight to this assertion, which was stated in the introductory note preceding the text in our magazine, I purposely changed or reworded quite a few passages of the original, and I must say that crippling and distorting Zamyatin's concise and beautiful prose made me feel like a criminal. The subterfuge, however, did not work. As soon as We appeared in Volia Rossi, the communist press in the USSR opened a violent campaign against the author and indicted him for having given his novel, which was banned in Russia, to an émigré publication. Dubbed a counter-revolutionary and an enemy of the people, Zamyatin was vilified and ostracized. He was compelled to resign from professional organizations and could not publish a line in Soviet periodicals. As he said later, by 1931 he became the devil of Soviet literature, and since to spit on the devil is considered a good deed, all the critics did nothing but spit on me as viciously as they could. His situation grew untenable, and he addressed a letter to Stalin asking for permission to go abroad to rest a while from baiting and persecution. Zamyatin's request was backed by Gorky, who loved and admired the creator of the district tale, The Islanders, and many other stories which influenced a whole generation of Russian writers. To the general surprise, Zamyatin and his wife were granted passports for traveling in Europe. After a short sojourn in Germany and Czechoslovakia, they finally settled in Paris, where I was living at the time. I must confess that I felt rather self-conscious about our first meeting. Was I not responsible, however, indirectly for what happened to Zamyatin in 1929? Had not the publication of We in Volia Rossi precipitated the attacks against him? But the moment I expressed my scruples to Zamyatin, he dismissed them with a smile. His sin, he explained to me, was not venial, but cardinal, almost original, and the Volia Rossi incident served simply as a pretext to crucify a heretic and shut him up forever. He spoke in a calm, even voice, hardly changing his inflections when throwing out a sarcastic hint or an ironic allusion. Even after a short conversation with Zamyatin, one could easily understand why communist officials fought him so fiercely. His whole personality represented a threat to conformity and a challenge to accepted platitudes. Here was a man, a gentleman, an independent artist, and a fearless thinker. We soon became very good friends, and our close relationship confirmed and deepened my first impressions. In the course of the 4 years Zamyatin stayed in Paris, I saw him very often. In the fall of 1935, he shared my apartment, and we had long, intimate talks almost every evening. To my admiration of the writer was now added my affection for the man. He was lean, of medium height, clean-shaven, with reddish blonde hair parted on the side. In his early 50s he looked much younger, and the malicious twinkle of his grey eyes gave a boyish expression to his handsome face. Always wearing tweeds with an unextinguished pipe in his wide, generous mouth, he resembled an Englishman. His whole appearance was neat and controlled. His manners were reserved, and to those who knew him but little, he seemed all buttoned up. A man kept an unmelting icicle inside, some hard core of strong will, perfect self-mastery, and sharp intelligence. Naval engineer and professional technician, he was equally devoted to mathematics and to the arts, and united logic and imagination, precision and fantasy. In his conversation, he used technological and theatrical terms indiscriminately, and would say, "At this time I was living in the town of Nikolaev. I constructed there several bulldozers and a few short stories." During the revolution, he trained a whole group of young men who later became known as Serapion Brothers. And he told me with his usual grin, "I taught them the art of writing with 90-proof ink." But this master of compact and lucid prose, this economic craftsman who preached functional expressionism, was, despite his cold and balanced exterior, a man of passions and delicate sensitivity. Alexander Blok, the great Russian poet, called him, with friendly mockery, the Englishman from Moscow. To all his friends, the national traits of intensity and deep feelings, of profound inner life and idealistic aspirations, were apparent in Zamyatin. Like many people with a scientific background, he loved dreams and irrational flights and glorified man's desire to overcome all his limitations. The enemy of conventional rules, dogmatic structures, and the letter of the law, he fought for the freedom of man in art and life. He told me with laughter how some petty party officials in Leningrad gasped with horror when he unfolded in a public meeting his beloved theory of the true revolution, the universal one, of which the social upheaval was but a minor aspect. The most revolutionary process, stated Zamyatin, was cosmic, and it encompassed the conservation of energy or its expense, the transformation of matter or the reduction of movement to immobility. And dogma, he would add, is the hard crust which imprisons the fiery magma, that molten material from which the hard rock is formed. Zamyatin had had a rich and varied life, filled with creation, work, and struggle. Exiled under Tsarist regime, persecuted under the Bolshevik regime, he never ceased to be a social satirist, and to lash at triviality and pettiness. He possessed a strong weapon, irony, and loved quoting Anatole France's slogan, "Teach men to laugh at the stupid and angry, lest we fall prey to the weakness of hating them." But often telling me about the crimes and abuses committed in Russia in the name of mankind's emancipation, Zamyatin could not hide his indignation. The more I knew him, the more I respected his integrity, the strength of his convictions, his moral courage, and his sense of human dignity, which made him reject compromise or political surrender. One evening, while describing the details of his departure from Russia, he read me the letter he addressed to Stalin in 1931. Its opening passage sounded like an excellent self-characterization. "I know," wrote Zamyatin, "that I have the very uncomfortable habit of not saying what is advantageous at a given moment, but whatever I believe to be the truth. I never concealed what I think of literary servility, toadism, and code-changing. I have always thought, and I continue to think, that such things are degrading for the writer as they are to the revolution." Leaving his beloved Leningrad, he wrote, "I may come back home as soon as it is possible in our literature to express devotion to great ideas without crawling before small men, and as soon as our attitude towards the artist of the world changes." This hope, however, never materialized. Nothing changed in the status of Russian writers while Zamyatin was working and struggling in Paris. His health, undermined by the privations of the revolutionary era and by the nervous tension in which he lived for years, declined rapidly. In the fall of 1936, I was summoned by his doctor, who told me that Zamyatin was incurably ill and that his days were numbered. A heart ailment, which kept him in bed for weeks, making his end imminent. Zamyatin became thin, almost transparent. He talked with difficulty, and his only joy was to listen to music, especially to Mussorgsky, Russian genius, whom he always admired as the greatest expression of Russian genius. He listened to Boris Godunov on the day of his death in March 1937. A small group of friends followed his coffin to the French cemetery of Thiais, near Paris. No obituaries in the Soviet press marked his passing. The official silence which isolated Zamyatin from Russian readers during his lifetime, continuing after his death. It lasted 20 years, but while it is being broken now in some critical circles, the works of this extraordinary and brilliant writer are still banned from his native land. Mark Slonim, Bronxville, New York, 1959.